Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us and welcome to the Q&A on the power of participation. My name is Melanie, and first I'd like to introduce Cheryl Kickett-Tucker, and she's going to give us a welcome to country. Thank you, Cheryl.
You're welcome, Mel. So, Kaya Wanju Nijak Wajak Nunga Buja. Thank you to one and all for being here today on behalf of the elders past, present and emerging, and the young leaders that we are breeding in our communities. I'd like to thank you for your good spirit to allow us to be here today on the lands of the Noongar Whadjuk people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cheryl.
You're welcome.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I hope that you firstly enjoyed the presentation, the webinar yesterday that was released from Dee. We found it very interesting, and it was a really great topic that we were discussing. So Children's Week in 2020 is reflecting on Article 15, which is looking at a child's right to choose their own friends and safely connect with others. So from that, we chose to talk about the power of participation, because that's really about how we are connecting with families, educators, community, and how are we supporting children. So we've got a really fantastic panel of presenters today, and I'd like to introduce them to you. For those who don't know, we have, I'm going to start with Cheryl because we've already met Cheryl. This is Professor Cheryl Kickett-Tucker. Cheryl is a highly respected traditional owner, research, academic, community development practitioner, and children's fiction author. I actually saw a few of your books when I was having a Google, Cheryl. You're very accomplished. Cheryl is a proud Whadjuk Noongar Aboriginal from Western Australia with traditional ties to Balladong and Nued peoples, as well as completing her PhD with Edith Cowan University. This year, Professor Kickett-Tucker was recognised for her significant service to the tertiary education and Aboriginal community, and was awarded the 2020 Queen's Birthday Honours as a member of the Order of Australia. Congratulations, Cheryl. Wow. And thank you so much for presenting with us today.
Thank you, Mel. Happy to be here.
Thank you. We also have with us the Commissioner for Children and Young People of WA, Colin Pettit. Colin has also recently been appointed as the Vice Chancellor of the Children's University in WA. Congratulations, Colin. Colin has spent his career working to improve the well-being of children and young people, particularly in developing education services and programs to children and young people living in regional and remote areas of our state. So welcome, Colin. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
We also have Amie Fabry. Amie is the project consultant of Universal Access at the Department of Education. Amie has a diverse skill experience in different sectors of early childhood education, both as a teacher at Perth Primary Schools and also a lecturer at Edith Cowan University. She's currently a PhD student in early childhood pedagogical leadership, as well as Secretary for Early Childhood Australia. Welcome, Amie.
Thanks, Melanie.
We have Professor Dee O'Connor, who joined us yesterday. I probably don't need to remind everyone of Dee's accolades, but Dee is an Associate Professor of Education at the University of Notre Dame. Dee has an extensive professional background in pedagogical leadership roles within early childhood education policy and practice. Dee's research interests relate to holistic early learning and development, learning environments, outdoor learning, and nature pedagogy, play pedagogies, the play to inquiry continuum, and the development of higher order thinking skills, particularly critical and creative thinking. And I think we saw a taste of that yesterday. Thank you very much for joining us, Dee.
Thank you, Melanie.
And last but not least, we have the incredible Caroline Heeris. Caroline is proudly representing Meerilinga today. Caroline is our advisor of integrated education with our Meerilinga services. We run 8 different services throughout Perth. She is also the coordinator of Children's Week in WA, which we are in the midst of right now. Caroline is an early childhood teacher and the lead trainer and assessor of Meerilinga's Training College. So Caroline is in there training our early educators every day, so she couldn't be more current. Caroline has more than 20 years of active experience in the early childhood industry. And not only that, Caroline is the ambassador of Children's Week in WA, and you might have seen her around the place as Fairy Queen Caroline. So thank you so much for joining us today, Caroline. We really appreciate having you here.
Thank you, Mel. It's a great pleasure to be here.
All right, well, thank you so much for coming. And I would like to thank our supporters today. We have Lotterywest and the WA Department of Education who have made this fantastic webinar possible. So thank you very much for their support too. Let's get started. Based on yesterday's webinar, hopefully you've seen it. If not, you should be able to get the link to the webinar on the Facebook event page, or if you email us or me at marketing@meerilinga.org.au, I'd be happy to send you out another link. The first question to start us off is, and it seems to be directed probably to everyone, but let's start with Dee to respond. There seems to be a lot of pressure on parents and teachers to support children to excel in sporting and academic areas. While children are participating, how does this pressure affect their well-being, do you think?
Well, I suppose it's a question of two parts really, because sporting participation and academic participation are very different, and pressure within both looks very different. So looking at the academic side of things, I think that's really important to remember that there's a huge difference between holding high expectations for children and putting pressure on children. So holding our high expectations for children is a very positive thing. We should never assume that they can't do something with the right scaffolds. So, and the research shows that they do rise to our expectations, but that's very, very different to putting pressure on them. Putting pressure on them is not listening to them, is not taking into consideration their views and desires for what they engage with, and that is going to cause a disconnection between parent and child or teacher and child, and that disconnection is going to have repercussions for how they feel in terms of their sense of belonging in the classroom or even in the community. So reflecting on which of those we're doing is probably a good place to start. Are we holding high expectations or are we putting pressure? And if it's high expectations, then reflecting on the best way to communicate that and support the child in that. And if it's pressure, then reflecting on how we can instead look at what the child is telling us through their various ways of communicating. For sport, I think that it's a little bit different. It's really important that children are fit and active, but again, their voice and their choice should be paramount in terms of how they engage with that and what they choose to do in terms of movement and play and the types of sports that are available to them. And that's probably kind of all that needs to be said there, is that do they want to do it? And if they want to do it, great. And if they don't, what do they want to do?
Thank you, Dee. I actually would really love to hear from Cheryl about this question. I know Cheryl has a lot of influence in sport, and you might be able to tell us a little bit about the work that you do with basketball and other sports, Cheryl, and children and their participation and what that brings.
Yep, I can certainly do that. While I'm in the Koya office at the moment, and we've got a soccer program going on, so kids are walking in and out of here. But in terms of putting expectations and pressure in sport, particularly with the vulnerable families and kids that we work with. So we've got kids as young as 5, and we've got young people, they range up to 22 at the moment. And in terms of expectations, I guess we don't look at it as expectations of the Court and Horizons after the multi-sport after school program. So we've expanded from our signature sport, which is basketball, to soccer, netball, swimming, running and boxing at the moment. And so in terms of expectations, we've renamed that and rebadged it as potential, that every child had the potential to reach a horizon, but we're kind of like their beacon to light the path up, but they've got to create that path themselves. So I guess a part of our thinking in terms of expectations and pressure is it is about obligations as well, and that our philosophy here is we'll teach you to fish, we're not going to give you fish. So the importance of having developed skills, knowledge and confidence, but also having a support network outside of school hours that kids can come to, so they can meander through and journey through the ups and downs of sports and the pressures of sports. In our case, we treat every child as a family member, and so it's not about winning and losing. We're utilising sports to build kids their life skills, but also their hope and inspiration for the horizon they choose to do. We don't judge anybody, we don't push anybody. It's whatever the path that they set forward, we're just the beacon to light it up a little bit for them at the end of the day. And I guess that's our philosophy. All our coaches are parents as well, so they're aware of that. No matter what you do, and particularly in the Aboriginal community, how you do it and how you say it, the body language, the kids will take notice of the body language well ahead of what you say. So they better match. And if they don't match, you're going to confuse the child. But at the end of the day, we're all about teaching compassion and empathy and building that within each individual kid before they can share and actually have that attitude and that behaviour that follows for other children of different cultures and languages. We started off with Aboriginal kids in our program, and now we've got 16 nationalities. So there is a high cohort of Aboriginal kids, but our doors are open to anyone in the community that needs us. Thank you for that question. Thank
you so much, Cheryl. That's a great answer. There's a lot to think about. I think I want to join. Maybe I should flash back a couple of years. And all right, thank you so much. I think we'll move to the next question. I've got a question here, and it says, what are some strategies to give children the agency to choose their own friends in a safe way online? I think Colin could start us off on this one.
I thought you'd go here. Thanks for that. And can I just thank both the previous answers? I thought they were great. In terms of online, there's always a danger of people thinking that online is mainly an evil thing. And we need to actually understand that children and young people, particularly today, are going to get online whether we want them online or not. So it's about understanding that world ourselves as much as anything else. But the first thing I think we've got to do is make sure that parents are comfortable with what their child is expressing online. And there are plenty of apps to allow parents to help monitor. And monitoring should be a two-way thing. So it's not just something you spy on your kids with. It's more about that conversation with them about why you need to have this type of app, how you would use it, and why you would use it. In terms of online choosing friends, it's no different than choosing friends face-to-face. It's about making sure people have very open and transparent conversations. Young people understand where they fit in this particular relationship and why they're having that relationship, because without all that, it's very difficult for them to forge friendships, just like it is for us. And so helping children understand that is really crucial. In a recent survey we did, one of the biggest questions we had back from particularly children about the age of 8 through to 10 or 11 is they wanted their teachers to help them form friendships. So they wanted to know, how do we form a friend, and then how do we maintain that friendship? It's no different with online. So it's about that discussion of why would you want to have friends? What do they bring to you, and what do you bring to them? And how do you actually support each other? But it needs to be in a safety of a shelter, I suppose, of parents understanding what's going on.
Great point. Thank you. Thank you, Colin. Would anyone else like to add something to this? Amie?
Yeah.
I think, I would just reiterate what Colin said, that, it is no different really than having friends in real life that you see in the present moment. And I think for our youngest children as well, it's really important that we actually talk about friendship, and we talk about the behaviours and the feelings that are involved in being a friend, and how our actions can influence other people and also ourselves. I think it's quite easy to take for granted that as adults we have those skills, but perhaps we don't necessarily model and talk through those processes and those behaviours and how we influence other people, you know, to solve conflicts, for example, and negotiate with other people. So, you know, I think it's really important that we are talking to our children. They are part of the conversation and we're participating with them, particularly when they're younger. And if they are using online spaces, then it's something that if you're a parent or an educator, that you're involved in that process and they're not left on their own to do that.
Point. And Cheryl, you had something to add as well?
No, I agree with what was said. I do think that predators do disguise themselves online, and I think we need to be able to teach our kids about that. In regards to my 10-year-old who's online, likes to play roadblocks and things like that, I check her chats, and she knows I'm going to be the police to check her chats. Because even though I trust my daughter, at the other end of the scale, you don't really know, it might say her friend's name from school, but it could be something completely different. So I'm really warning my child ahead of time. She's well aware if she sees anything that's unusual or not common in their conversation, she has to come and tell me, because quite frankly, I don't trust anyone at the other end of the line as a parent, and I'm not going to allow my 10-year-old to maneuver through that area by herself. The problem we've got though is, particularly in the Aboriginal community and very poor communities, is parents aren't really quite as educated about the do's and don'ts online, and it's kind of like a babysitting device. It's very dangerous. It's more dangerous than what we actually expect. So trying to improve the computer literacy of families who traditionally probably have never been online, and particularly with the mobile phones these days, it's quite dangerous, because the mobile phone's in the pocket of a kid and you don't know what they're doing down the street. You have no idea. You know, they may say, when they get into teenage, they rebel against you. So they might say what they want to say to your face, but as soon as they get out the door, it's a different kind of story, unless your child is completely honest. And let's look, I'm not saying they're all fibbers, but there is the capacity for a few little fibs now and again. And hopefully they're not big ones. But I personally will not give my daughter a mobile phone until she turns 16. I wouldn't do that to her. I think it's with the social media and Facebook, and I guess all the sort of stories that are filtered on that through kids, it is quite dangerous to their well-being if it's not looked after and it's not monitored properly. And there's so many platforms, and I mean, I'm learning all the time from the high school kids, Snapchat, this, that, this, and I'm trying to keep up with it all, and it's very hard, you know, and I think it'd be really difficult for families who are struggling at home with other things, do you know what I mean? And it's just a bit of a warning, because I know what really happens on the ground, and our antennas are up the whole time.
No, really great points. Yeah.
I might just jump in as well, actually, because I agree with kind of that whole spectrum of how all of that was answered. And it does feel a little bit, when the children go online, it does feel a little bit like a drop them off in the city centre, and you know, leaving them to it, because they could just meet anybody. That's what it feels like. And yet, all the research shows that with or without our permission, they are likely to do it and be doing it, and find ways around the things we put in place to try and protect them. So I think that the previous points are really important about the discussions, and also the apps. So there are several apps, and we use one as a family that covers all the mobile phones and all the devices and all of the computers and everything else that comes into the house and goes out of the house. And what it does is it shows you everything that has been engaged in, so like Colin says, not so that you are just spying, but so that you have something to sit down and say, can we have a chat about this? And that you are keeping the communication channels open, and that they do know that you're just want to keep them safe, and that they're not in trouble, that it's just a conversation that needs to be had, and that is really an important balance to try and strike.
Mel, if I could just add, and just to follow up on that, to help parents and teachers, the eSafety Commissioner has a fantastic website which goes through how to support children at all ages online in a really safe way. So there are tools out there and there are support for those people who need it.
Maybe I can put a couple of those things at the end when I send out a couple of notes from today. Thank you very much for all of that information. All right, next question. Moving on, I've got a question here that says, I know that we can support children to build resilience when they say fall out of a tree and get back up, but how do we support them when there are real world challenges that are out of our control? I saw Caroline and Dee nodding. Would you like to start over that side?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I think we've actually just experienced one of those real world challenges that's been out of anybody's control, really. From my perspective, I think that the best thing we can do is go back to the core of what's really important, and that's relationships and talking to children, reassuring children that they're actually not alone, that they don't have to face this on their own, and making sure that we have those conversations to reassure children that they're not on their own to deal with things that on this scale.
And I think as well that, you know, they're not disconnected to the idea of building resilience when they fall out of the tree and how they'll cope when they hit challenges that are outside of our control. The idea of building resilience in our children, I guess, would mean that we'd hope that they then have a very strong foundation and a strong sense of themselves, particularly from a self-identity and self-concept perspective. So that when they are faced with challenges, that they feel that strong foundation and make good decisions. And I think all of our developmental research shows that when a child and a person has a strong self-identity, that they understand who they are and their self-esteem is high, that they make good decisions in challenging situations. And so the work that we do in trying to build that resilience in the early years actually really prepares them very well for the challenging world that they will live in.
Thank you very much, Dee and Caroline. Would anyone else like to add anything else? If not,
I would just, sorry, Mel, sort of, you know, building on from both Caroline and Dee, I think, you know, like as Dee was saying, it's really important that children sort of believe in themselves, that they are capable of overcoming challenges, no matter how big or small. And that's a process that happens through actually experiencing some challenge in the first instance. But I think also connecting with what Caroline said, it's also about showing children through those experiences that there are people around them who really care about them, so they develop a sense of their support network and where they can go for help as well, so that they don't feel alone and that they have to just be able to cope with challenges on their own. But there's actually people who really care and who are nearby who can offer support and strategies. And sometimes that's figuring it out as we go along. We don't always have the answers. So I think that support network is really crucial too.
Thanks, Amy. I'm going to just jump in again, Melanie, if that's okay. Sure. I did say to Melanie yesterday, you know, do feel free to tell me to stop talking.
there might be news coming up.
I do just want to add on to what Amy was saying there, because resilience is really what children and people need when they hit challenges at any stage in life. And resilience comes about not through not necessarily in the way that people think. So the things that are damaging for our resilience is never encountering challenges or encountering extreme challenges and being unsupported in them, so that we are left alone and left with trauma. But the two ends of that, the not experiencing any challenge and experiencing challenge and being unsupported, they damage our resilience. But in the middle, is this wonderful way to build resilience, is where children can encounter challenges and they can experience failures, but they are supported, and that they feel the love around them, and that they feel the sense of support from their family, their friends, their community, and they find a way to work through it and get out the other end and know that that terrible sense, that terrible feeling is temporary, and that they don't need to get stuck there, and that there is always hope and always progression. And that is what resilience is that's a mindset for pushing through challenge. So the two sides of them doing well really within challenge is having a strong sense of themselves, high self-esteem and good self-identity, and also having had challenges that have been overcome, have been supported to overcome, and know that that can happen.
I think we're probably running low on time on this question, but Cheryl, did you have anything you wanted to put in?
I got a whole paper I wrote down.
Yeah.
So we often, as academics, we often talk about what is resilience with an Aboriginal lens. So there's a couple of us that, you know, would like to know, what does that look like? What does that feel like in our community with the age groups that we deal with? I think in our community with kids that are suffering with intergenerational trauma and families, the challenges become a definite mindset and a part of normalisation, which is really, really dangerous, because then their range of coping strategies are quite limited. So passive to aggressive, and there's nothing in between. And if you look at the parents in those times when they're being challenged, they've got very similar limited range of coping strategies. So they're the kinds of things that we look at in our community. A couple of the things that we do here at the KK&H program is we teach our kids to change their lens on life, and we teach them that their cup is half full even when challenges come, and that they can only control what they can control. I think someone said about getting support from family and stuff like that, but if the family aren't able to give support, then there's got to be other avenues. They have to be able to speak with confidence and clearly articulate where the help's going to come from. Our organisation is very much available after hours when most of the care bears and the youth services and all that are closed. We're open. So that's a big difference with our organisation. And the other thing that we teach our kids is knowing that sometimes this is part of life as well, and that life isn't a straight line. It does have the highs and lows, and it's when you go in the low phase and some of this trauma and some of this challenges that happen to you, there's always going to be a point where you're going to come up. So we focus the kids on the coming up bit, ready for the next one. And the more and more, Caroline's right, the more and more exposure you get, the easier, and I guess the more confident you become in handling the next one that comes along, and that it's part of life. And when you're a young kid, you may not, and actually in our case, they do experience a lot of life events such as death of family and family violence. So they're exposed to that pretty quickly. And so they grow up, their resilience is quite high, but at the same time, their coping strategies are really poor. And that's why you get kids that are self-harming and all the rest of it. Their support networks aren't there. So for us, it's a little bit different. And lens on resilience is a little bit different. And but at the end of the day, if the kids have some sort of hope and one person who is part of their circle, whether it's their family or support group, sports group, whatever, one person that they can rely on to always talk to, most of the issues can be resolved in some sort of way with that child if they've got someone to speak to on a regular basis, someone who doesn't judge. Someone who's a listening heart is what we call it, having a listening heart with no judgments. And that's half the problem, because the kids will work out themselves that the challenge faced in front of them isn't as big as really what it really is. In the scope of the world and what's going on, they don't know. They only know what's in their postcode, and their family. So that's a big learning curve that we've learnt from our kids. So, they're highly, geez, they know a lot, you know, and as adults, you know, I'm very grateful and honoured to be able to learn from these kids because, you know, I was young a long time ago. So I'm very happy to learn about this sort of stuff. And it changes too. I think it's changing over time, which is exciting to see because kids are getting better at handling trouble, you know, but there's some kids that don't too, you know, it's not like we're all the same. So I just want to add that little bit there, Mel. Thank you.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Cheryl. It was a real look into, and I guess helping us to understand as well the different challenges faced by different demographics. We had a question, maybe bouncing back just for a brief moment to the previous online question. We had a really great point from the audience asking about families with parents and carers who may be unable to understand the online tools available. So if they might be illiterate or unable to access online sort of tools themselves or navigate that world, are there some other avenues that they might be able to use to better understand these online tools and how to protect their children? Colin, you look like you might have something.
Well, I think we're all pausing because I'm not sure there is a simple answer to this. And obviously, if you're talking about some of our more vulnerable groups, then we need to have services that support them, and they need to understand how to support those vulnerable people, particularly carers and others. And so while the tools may not be accessible to everyone because of their literacy or whatever it is, then we need to have services that understand those tools and can actually help the groups with them as they're required. Not an easy thing, and that's why I think we all sort of paused and thought, how do we answer this? Because there are people out there who can't access because of their own abilities and position that they have. And that's why we as a society walk around and certainly try and support vulnerable groups. And that shouldn't mean that we shouldn't use those tools. It just means we've got to find a way to help them through service provision to open up the doors for them. And there are some really good opportunities I see in local governments, for example, where they do that in very vulnerable areas and try and support parents. But again, the parents have to come halfway and want to be part of that as well.
Thank you so much, Colin. Sorry for throwing you in there, but you answered it very well. Would anyone else like to contribute anything before I move on to the next question? Okay, thank you very much. I have a question here about forging connection and building relationships. It says, besides those kind of streaming face-to-face sessions like FaceTime or Skype, what are some other ways that educators can maintain a strong sense of connection to children, as well as to families and the community? I feel like it sounds like some people had some challenges feeling connected. Would you have some other ways of doing this?
I'm sure everyone's pausing here too, because there is no easy answer to this one either. And there's absolutely nothing to replace face-to-face. And yet, you know, this is the world that we find ourselves in, and it's likely that we're going to have these challenges again, you know, sometime. So it's a really, really valid question. And we had a taste of it earlier in the year, and like many people, I was teaching online for the first time and trying to support my children who were being taught online, including my youngest, who's still in kindy. So I got to see it from a few different angles. I think that some of the things that my children's teachers did and that I did for my own students that were effective, and a little bit time consuming, but really the most effective thing was phone calls. So I called each of my students and had a conversation with them, and that really to me, I suppose, feel connected to them and help them feel connected to me. And teaching is centered on relationship. And it is really hard to learn from somebody we don't have a relationship with. My children's teachers also did that. And I know that schools handled it all really differently, but that's how my children's school handled it. They each got a phone call once a week from their teacher. And my kindy teacher did a video call with my kindy kid, and he walked around the house and showed her everything that belonged to him, and showed him all you know, what's in his yard and what he plays with, and turned on the hose and watered the plants while he was talking to her, and she and he enjoyed that an awful lot, and it did definitely bring forward a sense of connection in their fledgling relationship, and I couldn't recommend it highly enough. But the connection between the children in the class is also really important, and they do forget so easily at that age. And I think another thing that helped him was that she sent a picture of herself, and she sent pictures of all the other children in the class, and he made a collage of those and put them up in his room. So we had all of the other children and their names and his teacher, and just that visual connection was there. She started with some Zoom sessions, which were, you know, disastrous. Kindy children in a group session on Zoom was, you know, never really going to be too great, but moved to video sessions where she sent videos of herself reading stories and telling them stories, and showing them things that she was doing, and then asking for videos in return, and setting up smaller sessions with 2 or 3 of them so that they could contribute. All of those things, I think, helped enormously.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to add anything?
I think one of the things, I have young children as well, and one of the things that's for me is when we think about relationships, they're reciprocal. So it's not just about finding out what children are doing, but also my daughter's teacher actually shared what she was doing, and that came through with some photos and a letter that she emailed through. So it was again sort of building the relationship and saying, well, hey, this is what my world looks like, even though I'm your teacher as well. I'm doing this, and you know, I've been for a walk down to the park, or here's a photo of me and I've made this cake because it's my mum's birthday and I'm going to drop it at her front door. You know, it's just connecting with them and sharing their lives as well. I know in one of our kindy links, we had an educator who invited families to come at a different time so that they, you know, were socially distancing, but to pick up sort of active hands-on packs that the children could then do with the families at home. And when they came, they sort of went through the obstacle course, and it was there for them so they could still kind of participate even though they could not be together, but it was finding a way to engage with the families and still kind of keep those lines of communication open and feel that connection to the Kindy Link service, even though they couldn't be there all together.
Sounds like some great initiatives. I think that sounds really good. Would Cheryl or Colin like to say anything before we move on? Cheryl?
Colin, I thought you were going to say something. Okay. I'm going to turn my attention to young people rather than children, okay? So in order to forge some sort of connection, well, I wouldn't forge a connection with young Aboriginal kids. To be connected and a sense of belonging is really important. And with our community, it takes a long time for that to happen. It doesn't happen overnight. And so one of the ways to do that is to develop an idea of kinship connections and who's related to who and who's who, and who, you know, like I get called Nana, Auntie, and sister on the court in basketball because I've got relationships everywhere. But with young adults, building those kinship connections, and actually you can't do that unless you actually sit down and have a yarn with them, and it's not over the phone. It's got to be face to face. It doesn't work otherwise. And once you know those kinship connections, you make connections to their people and their country, then you can work out where you fit in their world, not where they fit in our world. So that's the first important thing. The next important thing is any kind of communication with young people has got to be two-way. So, and you've got to listen more than talk. And that's hard for someone like me. But I've got to do it. You know, I've gotten better over the years, and I've got to be very careful on, there's no such thing as time in our community as well. Like, it just takes whatever it takes. So, you know, being really sincere in your words and in your body language, being authentic, being and having a genuine interest, and also being respectful of quiet time when the kids very, very quiet because something's going on in their life and it's probably some sort of life challenge, and you can't ask any questions. If they respect you and you've built a relationship based on respect, reciprocity and responsibility, because then comes the relationship, then that person will tell you what else is going on in their life, so you can reach out to them, and you've got to respond. The thing about teenagers, when they speak to you face to face, they'll come back to you with text messages, and you've got to respond straight away. Doesn't matter if you're meeting the minister, the prime minister, it doesn't matter. You've got to respond, because those kids' lives are in your hands, you know, and it could be something serious and you really don't know. The other thing about teenagers, they change their mobile phones like they change their underwear. So that means that at every opportunity that you get to speak with them, you check in and ask them, is this still your phone number? And I actually, on my phone, I've got kids' names. Let's just say Peter, for instance, Peter 200. Which I know I'm up to the 200s phone numbers for this child, or 100 or 300. I know that it's gone, you know, it's just mind-boggling. It seriously is. And it's really important every time you do speak to them, you do check in with them and go, is that still mum's number? Are you still living at this address? Is this still your phone number? And are we good? Are we good? And then they're the things that work in my community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. All right, wow, there's a lot to think of. We've got the next question now. This is probably going back to Dee's presentation, and we were discussing sensory activities and the benefits of some sensory activities like playing in mud, making mud cakes, really getting involved. The question came through saying, what are some ways to include children with varying abilities to participate in these group sensory activities if maybe they don't enjoy sensory play? Would anyone like to start us off?
So this would be for classroom activities?
I suppose so, yes. I think it was more looking at trying to involve people in a group and set up an activity for everyone to do, when obviously not everyone will want to do that one activity, I suppose.
So I would think the first thing I would do, I would actually ask that group to come to a consensus on exactly what we should be doing as a group. What activity? What is the thing that you want to do that's a lot of fun? And go with that to start with. We do that in basketball, where we get together as a group, as a consensus, and this is an Aboriginal decision-making framework that we all get to have a say, and we all decide together what we're going to do. And I might give a couple of options on a couple of different activities, and they've got to pick, and they've got to decide and come together. And I tell you, it's really fun to watch, and you can actually see the kids who become leaders and the ones that are shy, and then you get to see the leaders to ask the shy kids, what do you think? So it's a really good thing to watch. And then usually we come up with the one idea, and then we probably backtrack to the second and third idea anyway, because we've already done the first one and the kids have got so much fun out of it. They go, well, let's try the other one as well, and let's try the other one. But with us, the control's back with the children, and that's my point. That's what I'm trying to say. Whatever they want to do, and we just follow. Really, they're teaching us, you know.
I think that's really good practice for all classrooms, to really think about those democratic principles in your teaching, and that co-participation and shared decision making. It's really good for their development, really good for their thinking skills and their social skills, and their sense of their own empowerment and their own voice, and and you know, building all of those pre-citizenship, sorry, tripping over that word, pre-citizenship skills and their higher level thinking skills as well. It takes a little bit longer, and I think that teachers and educators sometimes shy away from it because of the amount of time that needs to be spent in the process of getting to the experience rather than just going to the experience. But actually the process of getting to the experience is an experience in its own right and should be seen like that. So planning for that time for the children to be really involved and allowing the child that doesn't like sensory activities to have their voice and to be heard in that. And as they get down through the years, if you're in childcare and you're working with pre-verbal children that aren't enjoying sensory activities, or if you're working with a kindy class and that there's a child who never comes to a place of wanting to engage in sensory experiences, then you might look at how you can scaffold that for them in an individualized way. So what might be sensory for them might be less intense, and so step it right back to what they are comfortable with, and maybe try some one-to-one so that the other sensory inputs are lowered so that they're not trying to go across the whole plane of sensory inputs to engage in something that we would consider sensory, and that can be very supportive. Also modeling, getting involved yourself, and can be powerful for very young children as they see you engaging in it, and especially if you you know, use it as an opportunity to sit down with them and connect with them, and they can feel the invitation to connection through the experience, but that you have really taken into consideration how intense this is for them and stepped it back to the beginning level as adults.
I can just add to that too, Dee. I think we need to remember the power of play with young children, and the hands-on, unstructured play is mostly sensory. So as Dee said, what could be a sensory experience for one child in, let's just say, a messy play experience might not be that a different child. Every child is unique, of course, and then that child might not want to engage in that. Also remembering that some children actually do come to daycare and do come to the early years centres in very nice clothing with instructions that they're not to get dirty. And I think sometimes children can be very reluctant and lack of experience to get engaged in some of the more messy sensory plays. So obviously scaffolding is one way to do it, but remembering that all children are unique, and what might be a play experience for one child might not necessarily be a play experience for another.
I did an observation in a kindy mud day one time, and was watching the children as they engaged in lots of mud available to them. And some children lay down in the mud and did like mud angels. And some children picked up a little bit of mud with a spoon and put it in a pot and mixed it around, and picked up a little bit of bark with the spoon and mixed it around. And they're both engaging in the mud play, but at vastly different points of connection. So I really agree with that if you present the experience in an open-ended way, then children can bring themselves to it in a way that works for them. And on the point of the clothes, I think we really do need to communicate with parents about how important it is that children can really engage in lots of experiences, that, you know, there should be particular clothes for school or for childcare that, you know, can take it.
I love it. I'm picturing those mud angels, and I think it sounds like a fun afternoon in the office.
Hey Mel, can I just say something?
Of course.
Mel, I just want to talk about those sensory activities that we just spoke about, and how as kids go through high school, it gets less and less and less, right? And so there's got to be a push for middle school and high school kids to still have these sensory activities, because we've got a lot of kids that are being diagnosed with ADHD and, you know, all this other things. But even if they're not diagnosed with that sort of stuff, which I know sensory activities are good for, the normal kid off the street, their access to sensory activities gets less and less and less and less, and the pen and the paper are the mighty swords. And unfortunately, there are a lot of kids are dropping out of school for whatever reason. And just thinking about this conversation, I was thinking, you know, there's not very much sensory activities happening in the school environment at high school level. We took kids on Camp Horizon about a year or so ago, and we let them loose in the commando course where there's a lot of mud. And of course, I have 15, 16, 17-year-olds rolling around in the mud just to see how dirty they could get and whose parent they could get angry more the most. So, and when we let them go, because we weren't washing their clothes, but the whole process of making mud pies and you know, getting ambushed, and it was fun. It was a lot of fun. And I think the fun part of the sensory activities is really important for the high school kids to balance out that academics kind of activity. And I think, you know, particularly Aboriginal kids are hands-on. They're kinesthetic learners. They've got to do with their hands, and more of that would be, I think, quite beneficial to part of their healing, trauma kind of training, and also just unwinding and, you know, being in the moment. You know, that mindfulness, which is really important in our community, particularly when they're on alert with these phones all the time, and it drops them out of that space for a little while. You know, like can you imagine yourself in a pottery session? Playing with pottery on a pottery wheel is really quite therapeutic, you know. And I know using artwork with Aboriginal kids is very therapeutic as well. So maybe we need to do more of a push of the sensory kind of activities, you know, art and some, you know, water maybe, or, you know, I don't know, but, and the kids will tell you in the high school setting. That would be quite beneficial, I think. Thank you.
I think Cheryl makes a really good point, and one of the verses in the Children's Week song that we have addresses parents, but also older children, and it says, remember the child in you and take time to play every day. And I think as adults, with the topic of participation, having adults, parents, teachers, role models, engaging with children and playing with children, participating too. The power of play for everybody, I think, just cannot be underestimated. So I think we need to remind ourselves, even as adults and for our older children, of the importance of play for well-being.
Thank you so much. We're running low on time. We've got 2 questions left, so let's do this. First, I would like to address a question from Supriya. Supriya asked, and it was kind of, we were discussing the early learning environments before and choosing based on their own interests. She was interested in early learning environments where classes are planned for all children, and it's kind of seems to be despite their own interests and learning needs. How do we encourage children to participate and make discoveries of their own when the classes are so planned? Maybe Amie could kick us off.
Sure. Look, I think first and foremost, and really it doesn't matter what context we're working, whether we're working with high school kids or whether we're working in early learning, education and care, or in a school context, we have to keep asking ourselves why we provide the opportunity to learn that we do. And are they engaging our children? Do they enjoy them? Do they feel that sense of connection to their environment and their peers? And it's a whole package. So rather than sort of isolating and planning, and, you know, I know teachers like to be really organised, I think we do have to be really mindful and really intentional about stepping back and actually focusing on the children too, and providing time so that they do have a voice. And it does sometimes mean letting go of a bit of control, which can be hard, but I think there certainly is a real need for us across all sectors to really look at how we're involving children and allowing them to have genuine opportunities to participate. And that includes listening to them, listening to their ideas, their experiences, what matters to them, and what it is they might want to learn about and how they might want to learn. So, we've already talked about the importance of play and whether it's messy play or not. I think, again, it's about giving children some ownership and actually listening to what matters to them and what they want to do, and not expecting every child's journey to look the same, because children are so individual. And I think when we do provide those opportunities, we really show children that they are not only capable, but they're really valued for who they are. And we need to sort of grow that from the ground up, right from the youngest ages, so that children are feeling capable and recognising in themselves that it is actually a good thing to be different, that they can learn in different ways. They can make choices about who they engage with. They can make choices about, a learning centre that they engage with in the classroom, for example, or even how they use those materials or how they demonstrate what it is they know. So again, rather than necessarily saying, well, everyone's working in the mud today, whether you like it or not, but actually to go, well, maybe that doesn't meet your learning needs. How else could we explore this concept together, and how could you show that? So I think it's something that we all have to keep being really critical of ourselves as educators, and asking questions about what it is we're doing and whose purpose it serves. Is it really meeting the needs of all our children, or is it just meeting our own needs?
Great point.
That's a perfect answer, really. That really sums it up. That essentially, if we're planning for all children all of the time without individualization, differentiation, and children's interests, then that's something that we've really got to look at and change.
Mel?
Yeah, Cheryl?
I can give you 2 examples of things I think are really good, but this is outside of school, right? Mm-hmm. So trying to change the education department, how they do business, might be a hard one. So my 10-year-old, when she was 10 months old, up until she was 4, because you get kicked out of the program when you're 4, she did Aboriginal Best Start program, and Department of Communities funded it. Great program, great staff, and then change of government, everything went. That was one of the best programs I'd ever been involved in as a parent with my 10-month-old right until she was 4 years of age. And that business of unplanned activities and discovery, I mean, it was all about that. It was all about the environment in and out of the classroom, and particularly on building relationships and a lot of that sensory activity. It was amazing. Even as a parent, I learned a lot of stuff about little tackers with my own daughter, and it was really good for me too, being a mum at an old age, to come back and mix with younger mums. So it was good for me as well. So that was run during school time, but for younger children. Now the other program that's in the Mundaring Shire is called Chaos. So it's an after-school club. So what that does, same sort of thing, have kids of varying abilities, backgrounds, and it's all, there's very little planned activity. They ask the kids what they want to do, and they basically do what the kids want to do, There's a few planned activities, but it's all about self-discovery and working together in small teams, large teams, and by themselves, and all they do is have major fun. And I think maybe these after-school activity fun clubs is probably the way to go, because teachers have a lot on them anyway. They've got to learn so much, and they've got capacity building, they've got a PD, particularly around the cultural responsiveness framework for Aboriginal kids. That's a lot of work. But having these, funded after-school activities would be a good way to go. The only thing going into a high school area, when we're talking about planned activities and kids making their own discoveries, when kids are forced, particularly Aboriginal kids, into academies at high school and they don't have much of a choice, that's wrong, because they're not exploring the world for themselves. They're told that they're good at something, you've got to go into this academy, you've got to go into that academy, and they don't get the choice sometimes. And the repercussions are quite disastrous. And I know myself that we have kids who grandparents ring us because they're not doing so well in those sports academies and whatnot. And then there's a repercussion for that family and that community. And so there's, you know, there needs to be, you know, I know at one of the high schools here, there's a Fame Academy, and I think that's a really good thing because it's all about acting, stage production, lighting, music, and a lot of our kids are quite talented in that space. But it's only during school time, you know, it's not after school. You know, back in the 80s, you know, when we used to do athletics for the school, we used to train after school on the ovals. But with all the policies around insurances, you can't do anything on the school grounds anymore. So it stops. There's all these barriers, you know, but maybe a way out is these community-run clubs, perhaps, you know, home ec clubs, the fun activity club, and maybe bring the Best Start back. That would be ways around planned activities, maybe another option. I'm not sure. Anyway, thank you.
I like the sound of all of those community groups as well, contributing to that avenue for creating some more interest-based groups and clubs and activities to support other needs and interests, which is great. Now we are at 5 o'clock. Is everyone happy to do one more question, or is anyone out of time? Fantastic. All right, let's go to the last one. Finally, this was an interesting one. It's going back to the sensory and emotional experiences. Dee, you touched on in your presentation how facial expressions and tone of voice really affect a child's understanding and in some ways development. So it was saying, how do we as educators navigate our own emotions to create the best learning environments for children? Are we meant to try and regulate our frowns and voices and reactions to give the right message? And how do we do this 8 hours a day in a practical working environment?
I suppose I'll take that because I think it is related to some of the things that I said in the webinar. I love this question, and I think that the person who asked this is a deep thinker and deeply engaged with trying to do a very important job as well as they can. So thank you, Leslie, for sending in that question. And it's a really important one. So it's a human profession, and it's okay to be human, and you will have good days and you will have bad days. But it is really important that you are reflective and that you are honest. So children really respond to authenticity, and they understand good and bad days too. I think that if there's something going on that's contributing to you having a bad day, that it is really good to get into the habit of taking 5 or 10 minutes to reflect before you start class, about how you're going to manage feeling like that day, how you're going to communicate that to the children in a way that they understand. So say if you had a pet that died, or if you have somebody in your family that's ill, then these are things that everybody goes through, and that it can be good to explain to the children what's happening. If it's something more long-term, then you can be maybe more proactive around putting management around that. I really believe this, we're only ever as good an educator as we are a person, and that we all need to work on ourselves and on our lives to bring as much harmony into our existence as possible, and that does help us in our connections with children. If you team teach or have an EA and you don't get on, then that's something that you both have to step up to and try and address and bring a better relationship around to the classroom that the children are part of. Children pick up on tensions really easily. If you feel disempowered in your job, then again, that's something that you need to discuss. Sometimes educators aren't happy that they can't teach the way they want to teach, that something really imposed on them. I think it's really important to have those rich conversations in your team and with your leadership around why it is you want to do things a particular way, get the language to articulate and justify the approaches you want to take. Really identify what it is that's making you unhappy, if it's something long term, and be proactive about it. And if it is something short term, then it's something that can be used to have a really honest conversation with the children about. But the most important thing of all, I suppose, is not to ignore it, and because it seeps out in the cross voice and in the frown and in the overreaction and in the lack of patience. And that's the type of thing that they don't deserve. They deserve the best version of ourselves that we can give them. And it's a real deep commitment that we make as educators to, be really present for them and attentive to them, and also attentive to ourselves for them.
Thank you very much for that, Dee. I think that answered the question well. Would anyone like to make any sort of closing remarks on this question or any other questions before we go?
Mel, I might just jump in. Children and young people often tell us from all ages, from very young age right through to 18, that exactly as Dee said, if you're going to interact with us, be genuine, or in many cases they say get real. But they're really expressing the fact that you're going to have, exactly as Dee says, up and down days, and there needs to be two-way honesty. And so that's that open dialogue from day one that you meet a young person and how you then build that relationship. And so all the rest of it then follows, that if the relationship grows and is strong based on trust, then you can have that open dialogue and express things that you really should express in terms of how you're feeling, etc.
Very good point. And I love the fact that we know when it comes from the Commissioner, it's come from the voices of children. So it's a very, very good point to make. Cheryl or Amie, would you like to add anything before we close?
No, I'm fine. Thanks. Thank
Great.
you.
No, I don't think I can really add anything to what Dee and Colin have said. Just, to keep reflecting. We do make mistakes. We are human. And as Colin said, being authentic is sometimes as simple as actually saying, sorry, I overreacted. And I think that's okay too, because it also teaches children that, they might make mistakes too, and there's a way around it. We don't have to pretend we're perfect all the time. It is about being real and having real relationships, no matter what age the child is that we're working with.
That's such an important point, Amie. I'm so glad you made that. That when we make mistakes and we put obstacles in the way of our connections with children, that we do need to go back and repair them and say, I'm really sorry about that, and be really genuine and acknowledge when we make mistakes. So thanks, Amie, for adding that. It's super important.
Thank you all for coming. And thank you so much to my fantastic panelists today who joined us for this Q&A session. Thank you, Commissioner for Children and Young People, Colin Pettit. Thank you, Amie Fabry. Thank you so much, Professor Cheryl Kickett-Tucker. You were a really fantastic insight to have with us today. Thank you to Caroline, our Children's Week ambassador. And thank you once again to Dee for the webinar yesterday and for contributing today as well. It was really valuable information. This webinar Q&A session will be available on YouTube. You can have a look at it through the Children's Week website as well. So I'll send you the link to everyone after this session. Thank you again for everyone participating in Children's Week WA for 2020. And this Children's Week webinar was proudly brought to you by Meerilinga. We are the conveners of Children's Week in WA with the support of Lotterywest and the WA Department of Education. And would Cheryl like to say something else?
Oh, no, this is my daughter. Stop her. And look, she's eating an apple. Go 2 and 5.
Go for 2 and 5. Nice work. Leading by example.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, everyone. Have a great
Thanks, Mel.
evening.
Thanks, everyone.
See ya. Bye.